November 14th, 1904. The Ozark Mountains, Missouri. The cold air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a chill that seemed to seep not just into the bones, but into the very soul of the landscape. It was late afternoon, and the sun, already sinking low, cast long, spectral shadows through the dense canopy of oak and hickory. Captain Elias Vance, a man whose face was a roadmap of hardship and resolve etched by years in the Search and Rescue Division, zipped his heavy woolen coat higher. He stood at the precipice of what the locals simply called the pit, a vast, bowl-shaped depression several hundred yards wide that carved a menacing feature into the otherwise rugged terrain of the Ozarks. Elias wasn't a man given to flights of fancy. His work demanded a brutal adherence to facts, measurable distances, logical progression, the cold reality of human frailty. But the pit felt different. It had a stillness, an unnatural silence that choked out the usual sounds of the forest. The only movement was the occasional unsettling rustle of dry leaves skittering across the muddy rim like whispered warnings. His current mission was straightforward, yet deeply unsettling. Find Silas and Mary Moss. The couple, along with their teenage son, had vanished 4 days prior. Their homestead, a mile west, was abandoned mid-meal. No note, no struggle, just cold food and a profound, inexplicable absence. Silas Moss was a man of routines, a notoriously meticulous farmer who wouldn't leave his land, let alone his dinner, without cause. "Ready, Captain?" Corporal Finnegan, younger, leaner, and holding a newly lit oil lantern that offered a meager, flickering challenge to the encroaching gloom, stood beside him. Finnegan's youth was the only thing protecting him from the kind of cynicism Elias carried. "As we'll ever be, Corporal. Remember the plan. We follow the topography." They wouldn't have just walked into the center. They'd follow the gradual slopes, looking for anything out of the ordinary or, well, anything. Elias didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. In this line of work, anything usually meant a tragedy. They began their slow, deliberate descent. The slope was steeper than it looked, the ground unstable with loose rock and tangled roots. The air grew heavier, the silence more complete. Elias found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, a primal instinct overriding his logical mind. Why? There's nothing here but trees and rocks. Halfway down, a jarring sight broke the monotony of the forest floor. It was Silas Moss's axe lying near a patch of disturbed earth. It wasn't dropped. It was driven deep into the root of an old sycamore, the handle splintered near the head. An accident? Maybe. But the grip was almost obsessive, embedded with a strange, unnecessary force. Elias pulled it out, the wood rough and cold in his hands. "Look, Captain," Finnegan whispered, his voice thin with apprehension. He pointed with the lantern beam. Just beyond the sycamore, the earth gave way to a section of bedrock. But this wasn't natural. Stones, flat, rough-hewn slabs, had been stacked deliberately against a dark crevice, a crude barrier concealing a break in the rock face. It was almost perfectly camouflaged by a curtain of heavy, dead vines. "Someone went to a great deal of trouble to hide that," Elias muttered, dropping the axe. The air around the crevice was noticeably colder, and a faint, stale odor, like dust mixed with something metallic, hung in the still air. They worked together, prying the stones away. They were heavy, requiring both their combined strength and the use of the axe as a lever. As the last stone rolled away, revealing an opening just large enough for a man to squeeze through, the oppressive silence of the pit was instantly replaced by a sudden, jarring rush of air. A low, sucking exhalation from the depths below, almost like a sigh. Finnegan instinctively recoiled. "Captain, that felt wrong, like something was holding its breath." Elias ignored him, his focus already entirely on the dark aperture. He knelt, positioning the lantern. The opening led into a narrow, vertical shaft of carved limestone, descending into absolute darkness. But it was not empty. Inside, resting on a small ledge just a few feet down, was a single disturbing object. A small, hand-stitched doll, one of the kind Mary Moss was known to make for local children. Its button eyes stared upward, vacant and accusing, and beside it, faintly visible in the lantern light, were small, fresh scuff marks. The distinct tread of a man's heavy work boot, the same size Silas Moss wore. This was not a tragedy of exposure or a simple accident. This was a concealment, a hidden space, and the Moss family had gone into it. Elias checked his revolver, the weight of the steel a small comfort against the growing unease. They didn't fall, Corporal. They walked in here, and someone sealed them inside. He looked down the shaft, the light swallowed instantly by the black. "We're going in. I'm going first. You secure the rope and wait for my signal." The sense of isolation became absolute the moment he began his descent. The air grew heavy, thick with the damp, earthy smell and that distinct metallic tang. As his boots scraped against the rough-hewn walls, the light from the lantern swung wildly, catching glimpses of the crudely carved limestone. This wasn't a natural cave. It was man-made. An old, forgotten mining shaft. A bunker? Or perhaps something far older, far more private. After what felt like a painful eternity of slow, careful climbing, Elias's boots hit solid ground. The shaft opened into a narrow, low-ceilinged tunnel. The air here was almost stifling. He swept the lantern around, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The tunnel walls were lined with shelving, and the shelves were filled with jars of preserved food, stacks of blankets and tools, a prepared hiding place. He took a step forward, his boot crushing something small and brittle on the floor. He lowered the light. It was a fragment of bone. Elias felt the cold dread bloom in his chest. He moved quickly now, following the tunnel as it twisted. It ended abruptly at a heavy wooden door, braced with iron bands, unlike anything else in the tunnel, a formidable barrier. As he placed his hand on the cold iron handle, he heard it, a sound so faint, so unnatural in the depths of the earth that it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was a rhythmic, scratching sound, coming from behind the sealed door. Not a panicked sound, but a slow, deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape. Elias drew his revolver, the metal cold and steady in his hand, and he pushed open the door. The smell hit him first, the overpowering, sickeningly sweet, dusty odor, now mixed with something else, something wrong. The light from the lantern revealed a vast, high-ceilinged chamber carved deep into the limestone, larger than any cellar he'd ever seen. It was dominated by 4 massive stone sarcophagi, crypts of an old, imposing style, set against the far wall, the Moss family tomb. And standing amidst the dust and silence of the crypt, facing the wall, was Silas Moss. He was scratching at the smooth limestone with a sharpened piece of metal, his back rigid, his breathing ragged. He was muttering to himself, a low, repetitive chant that made no sense. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline, but it was quickly eclipsed by a crushing sense of bewildered horror. Silas didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge the light or the drawn gun. He just kept scratching. "Moss, Silas, stop." Elias's voice cracked the silence. Silas froze. Slowly, agonizingly, he turned around. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and fixed on a point far beyond Elias. He didn't seem to recognize the captain. And in the lantern light, Elias saw what Silas was wearing. A tattered, ancient funeral shroud, stitched with strange, dark symbols he'd never seen before. It wasn't Moss's shirt. It was old, filthy, and it enveloped the man like a second skin. Silas raised the shard of metal in his hand, but his movement was slow, mechanical. "They're waiting," he rasped, his voice a dry, echoing whisper. "They're all waiting to be uncovered." Elias took a step back, the sight of the shroud, The crypts and the deranged farmer, a terrifying confluence of the inexplicable. This was not a simple missing persons case. This was a dark, hidden history brought to a terrifying surface. The pit has given up a secret, but the silence holds the truth. If you're ready to descend further into the mystery of the Moss family tomb, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Don't miss the next chapter of this terrifying story. Captain Elias Vance didn't hesitate. The sight of Silas Moss in that grotesque ancient funeral shroud, combined with his disturbing mechanical movements, demanded immediate, decisive action. This wasn't a man in need of rescue. It was a man who had been fundamentally broken. "Moss, drop the metal now," Elias commanded, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. The smell in the air, the mix of decay, dust, and that strange metallic sweetness, was becoming overwhelming, making his head spin. Silas didn't seem to hear the command. He brought the shard of metal closer to his face, his eyes fixated on its reflective surface. "It has to be clean," he whispered, a dry, grating sound. "The symbols must be clean for the passing." Elias realized he was dealing with a severe psychological break, possibly induced by starvation, prolonged isolation, or something far worse. He lowered his revolver slightly, shifting his grip from a threat to a defensive posture. Shooting a deranged man wasn't a rescue. "Silas," Elias tried a calmer tone. "Where is Mary? Where is your son? We're here to help you get out." The mention of his family acted like a jolt of electricity. Silas's eyes snapped toward the massive stone sarcophagi that dominated the crypt. He pointed the metal shard at the largest one, centrally positioned. "They're where they belong," Silas said, his voice gaining a terrifying clarity. "They were waiting for the key, for the shroud." He brought the shard of metal down hard, scraping it violently across the stone floor, producing a shriek that bounced off the walls. Elias saw the danger. Silas was clearly unhinged and desperate. The man was holding a weapon, and his movements, though slow, possessed a frightening, almost unnatural strength fueled by delirium. "Corporal Finnegan is right outside, Moss. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Elias stepped carefully to the side, maintaining a clear line of sight. As Silas took a shuffling step toward one of the crypts, Elias noticed something critical about the room itself. It was far too large, too structurally sound, and too deep to be a simple recent hiding place. The limestone walls were not rough-hewn. They were meticulously carved, and running along the base of the walls were inscriptions. Not Christian, not Latin, but a series of interlocking geometric patterns and angular symbols that Elias had never encountered, all deeply cut into the rock. This crypt was ancient, forgotten, and clearly designed for a purpose far exceeding the simple interment of a frontier family. Suddenly, Silas lunged, not at Elias, but at the crypt. He threw his full weight against the massive stone lid, letting out a guttural scream that echoed off the high ceiling. The sound was pure anguish, not rage. Elias had his chance. He moved quickly, tackling the man low. The shroud tore, giving way to the sheer force of the impact. The struggle was brutal but brief. Silas fought with the desperate, flailing energy of a man possessed, his fingernails tearing at Elias's coat, muttering about the binding and the key. Elias managed to pin him, wrenching the metal shard, which turned out to be a piece of an old, sharpened steel letter opener, from his grip. He grabbed the rope from his belt, efficiently tying Silas's wrists. As he secured the final knot, Elias looked closely at the shroud that now lay partially on the ground. It wasn't just old cloth. It was woven from a material that felt surprisingly coarse and heavy, more like industrial sacking than linen. And the symbols Silas had mentioned. Elias now saw them up close. A repetitive pattern of intertwined, hook-like figures stitched crudely in thick, dark thread. They weren't mystical. They looked like crude, almost childlike representations of human spines and rib cages. Elias heard the scuffling sound of Finnegan's boots at the entrance of the tunnel. "Finnegan! I have him! Send down the stretcher and more rope." He stood up, his breath ragged, and turned back to the massive crypts. The terror of the moment hadn't subsided. It had sharpened, shifting from fear of a madman to a cold dread of the place itself. Why were there 4 crypts? Who were the others? And if Silas and Mary were the Moss family, why were they trying to enter or emerge from what was clearly a pre-existing mausoleum? Elias walked over to the crypt Silas had been attacking. It was a massive slab, perhaps 7 feet long, with an equally heavy lid. Running his hand over the surface, he felt something rough at the far end. He brought the lantern close. The lid was partially dislodged, pushed back a fraction of an inch from the main body of the crypt. The air that seeped out of the tiny gap was exponentially worse. A sickening, heavy, cloying smell that was instantly recognizable. Elias had smelled it before in the aftermath of mining accidents in the summer heat after a battlefield. It was the smell of advanced decomposition. He had to know. For Mary and the boy, he had to know what Silas had sealed away, or what he was trying to uncover. Using a metal pry bar he retrieved from Silas's collection of tools, Elias managed to wedge it into the small gap. With a groan of stone against stone, he leveraged the lid open far enough to peer inside, shielding the lantern flame against the sudden gust of putrid air. The light fell upon a cavity filled, not with dirt or empty space, but with a form wrapped in a thick, dark blanket. Elias recognized the blanket. It was a heavy, homespun wool, the kind used by the local Ozark families, identical to one he'd seen folded on the shelves in the connecting tunnel. He reached in, and with a grim determination, pulled the blanket away from the face. Elias let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. It was Mary Moss, but almost unrecognizable. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly, and her face was contorted in a final expression of mute, absolute horror. But it wasn't the decomposition that terrified Elias. It was the bruising. Deep, livid marks around her neck, clear indications of manual strangulation. Mary Moss had not been placed gently in this crypt. She had been murdered. And then, as the last vestiges of the blanket fell away, Elias saw it. The ancient, dark shroud, identical to the one Silas had been wearing, was wrapped around Mary Moss's body as well, fastened tightly across her chest. He stepped back, the lantern shaking in his grip. The metallic odor he had noticed earlier clicked into place. It wasn't just the smell of the crypt. It was the sharp, ferrous scent of fresh blood, slowly drying in the cold stone. Silas, tied on the floor, began to laugh, a dry, horrible hacking sound. "The family is complete," he whispered, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. "The binding is done." Elias looked at the 3 remaining sealed crypts. If Mary was in this one, and the husband was insane and covered in an identical burial cloth, where was the son? And who or what had killed Mary? The ligature marks suggested a powerful grip, a grip Silas was fully capable of possessing, even in his diminished state. The suspense has deepened into a murder investigation, shrouded in the bizarre setting of an ancient crypt. This is where the story truly begins. Elias didn't waste time trying to rationalize the horrific scene. He was a search and rescue officer, now thrust into the role of a frontier investigator. He had a dead woman, a deranged killer, he presumed, and a missing boy. "Finnegan, get down here. We need to move Moss now." Finnegan scrambled down the shaft, his face pale with exertion and fear. When he saw Silas tied and laughing on the floor and caught the sight of the open crypt and its horrific occupant, he stopped dead, his own lantern dropping and shattering on the stone floor. The chamber plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by Elias's single flickering lantern. "Dear God, Captain, what is this place?" Finnegan stammered, his voice choked with panic. "It's a tomb, Corporal. A very old, very private tomb. And it's now a crime scene." Elias kept his voice steady, his urgency overriding Finnegan's terror. "Get hold of yourself. We need to secure Silas and get him out before he goes into shock or worse. Use the new rope. Tie him securely to the stretcher. Do not talk to him. As Finnegan worked, his hands shaking, Elias forced himself to examine the rest of the crypt. He checked the 3 remaining sarcophagi. They were all sealed tight, the stone lids impossibly heavy. He didn't want to open them, not yet. He had to assume they held older remains, relics of whatever dark history was associated with this place. Elias turned his attention to the walls, holding the lantern close to the strange carvings. The geometric symbols he had noticed earlier weren't purely decorative. They formed a distinct pattern, a repetitive motif that seemed to be an attempt to document or illustrate something. He noticed a specific sequence of symbols near the central crypt, the one holding Mary Moss. As he traced the lines with a gloved finger, he noticed a variation in the stone texture. He pushed gently, and a small, almost invisible slab of limestone swung inward with a faint grinding sound, revealing a small niche concealed within the wall. Inside the niche, stacked neatly, were 3 items. 1. A journal, bound in dark, deteriorating leather with a simple lock clasp. 2. A small sealed glass vial containing a dried, dark, crystalline substance. 3. A large, ornate skeleton key, clearly very old, with a peculiar triangular bow. Elias recognized the journal immediately. It was Silas Moss's farm ledger, typically used for tracking crops and livestock. But this one was clearly repurposed. The old leather was slick with moisture and dirt. Finnegan, keep Moss covered. Don't let him out of your sight. I'm taking this evidence. Elias took the journal and the key, leaving the unsettling vial untouched for now. He knew he wouldn't be able to decipher Silas's madness, but perhaps his writings would offer a logical, however horrifying, path into the man's mind and motive. The lack of any sign of the Moss family son, William, was now a deafening silence. As they finally managed to strap the raving Silas to the stretcher, the man continued to babble incoherently about the purification and the deep sleep. Elias cast one last, lingering look at the chamber. He noticed something he had missed in the initial horror. The stone floor, near the crypts, wasn't solid bedrock. There were faint, almost imperceptible seams, indicating large, precisely cut paving stones. This chamber was not merely built into the earth, it was deliberately engineered. Who built this, and why? The grueling task of hauling the stretcher and the thrashing Silas Moss up the narrow shaft was made easier only by their professional training. When they finally emerged onto the forest floor, the last vestiges of daylight were gone, replaced by a pitch-black, oppressive night. The air above the pit felt blessedly cleaner. Yet the terror they had carried up from the depths clung to them like the cold, damp soil. They managed to secure Silas in the back of the wagon, placing a heavy guard on him. Elias knew a local doctor, an old friend named Dr. Alistair Hayes, who could handle the immediate sedation. But the matter was now far beyond a simple medical emergency. As Finnegan rode ahead to fetch the doctor and the local sheriff, Elias sat alone under the pale moonlight filtering through the trees, the leather-bound journal in his hands. He broke the simple clasp and opened the book. The handwriting was neat, meticulous, and clearly Silas Moss's. The entries didn't start with accounts of the corn harvest. They began abruptly, dated approximately 6 weeks prior, with a chilling clinical detachment. October 1st, 1904. The pit is not a pit. It is a lid. It covers the ancient silence. I found the entry point. The family name is not about ownership. It is about a duty, the duty to keep the silence. Elias's blood ran cold. The family name? He flipped forward, the narrative becoming increasingly unhinged, yet frighteningly consistent. Silas documented the rediscovery of the crypt's entrance, the excavation, and the subsequent preparation of the hidden chamber. October 15th. The preparations are complete. The crypt is whole. Mary is questioning my devotion. She does not understand the lineage. She does not understand the need for the binding. Elias flipped further, his heart pounding against his ribs. The narrative shifted from preparation to chilling action. November 9th. The binding must be done. The lineage demands a clean transition. She resisted. Her strength was unexpected, fueled by a selfish terror. The shroud accepts the blood. The central resting place is reserved for the keeper of the silence. The entry confirmed Elias's darkest fear. Silas Moss had, in his deranged state, murdered his wife and then sealed her body in the crypt. But the next entry was the most inexplicable, the most terrifying. November 10th. William is gone. The child has broken the cycle. He left the key to unlock the family's sleep. He must be found before the others wake. William is gone. The Moss son, William, was not with his father or his dead mother. He had escaped. He had been the one to leave the pit, but instead of running for help, he had only taken the key. Elias looked down at the ornate skeleton key in his hand, the key found in the niche alongside the journal. This wasn't the lock to the journal. It was a lock with a triangle design on its bow. Elias looked back at the journal. He flipped to the last page, where Silas had drawn a crude, meticulous sketch. It wasn't a map of the tunnel. It was a precise diagram of the central crypt lid, indicating a complex, almost invisible keyhole designed to be operated only by a key with a specific three-point design. The son hadn't just run away. He had stolen the key to the tomb, the key that Silas was now so desperate to recover. He hadn't just escaped death. He had taken control of the mechanism that sealed or unsealed the contents of the crypt. The key, the boy, and the truth about who or what lay beneath the stone. The arrival of Sheriff Ben Crowley and Dr. Hayes shattered the fragile quiet of the night. Sheriff Crowley, a stoic man known for his methodical investigations, listened in grim silence as Elias recounted the discovery. The hidden entrance, the raving Silas, the ancient crypt, and the strangled body of Mary Moss. Dr. Hayes, after administering a powerful sedative to Silas, examined the shroud. He confirmed that the man was suffering from acute, stress-induced psychosis, potentially exacerbated by whatever he had ingested or endured in the isolation of the pit. "The man is in a world of his own now, Elias," Dr. Hayes said, adjusting his spectacles. "He won't be coherent for days, maybe weeks. And this cloth, it's not local wool. It's a very old weave, Elias, far older than any moss has been in these hills." Elias handed the sheriff the journal and the key, outlining his theory. Silas, driven by a deeply ingrained psychological obsession linked to this crypt, had murdered his wife. The son, William, had witnessed it or realized the danger and fled, but not empty-handed. He took the key to the central crypt, the one Silas was desperate to open. "The boy, William, is the only witness, Ben," Elias stated, rubbing the grit from his eyes. "And he's running for his life, carrying the one thing Silas needs to complete his binding. We need to find him and find out what exactly he's unlocked, or locked away." Sheriff Crowley studied the key. A fine piece of work. Too complex for a simple farm key. This key looks like it's meant to lock a terrible secret, not just a wooden door. The sheriff immediately dispatched 2 deputies to begin a focused search for William, starting with the Moss homestead and the direction opposite to the pit. Elias, however, couldn't shake the unsettling realization that William hadn't taken the key and run away from the pit. He had taken it from the pit, meaning he had been inside. Elias decided to return to the homestead with the sheriff before dawn. The house, usually a place of warmth and domesticity, felt desolate and frozen. The interrupted dinner sat on the table, a chilling tableau of normalcy destroyed. As Elias walked through the rooms looking for clues William might have left, the sense of the Moss family's strange history grew stronger. In the living room, above the rough-hewn fireplace, was a portrait that immediately drew Elias's attention. It wasn't a painting of Silas or Mary. It was an old, faded charcoal drawing of a man in rough 19th century clothes. The man had the same intense, deep-set eyes as Silas Moss. Beneath the drawing, framed, was a small, handwritten document, a property deed, dated 1842. The language was dense, but the core was clear. The land, including the area known as the Pit, was deeded to a Jeremiah Moss, conditional upon the maintenance of an ancient familial duty. The details of the duty were left frustratingly vague, listed only as the care of the deep sleep and the silence. The family name is not about ownership, it is about a duty, Silas had written in his journal. It wasn't just psychosis, it was a deeply rooted ancestral obsession. The crypt wasn't just a hiding spot, it was a lineage. Elias moved to the boy's bedroom, a small, sparsely furnished space. William Moss, by all accounts, was a quiet, intelligent boy, known for his interest in geology and local history. Tucked under his mattress, Elias found William's own private journal, a school composition book, and a small, handmade map. The map was detailed, but not of the familiar Ozark trails. It was a precise, meticulous diagram of the underground tunnels and the crypt. It even showed the location of the concealed niche where Elias had found Silas's journal and the key. William had not only been inside the crypt, he knew it intimately. Elias flipped through William's composition book. The entries were observational, but they lacked Silas's crazed rhetoric. William was documenting what he saw, not what he believed. November 8th. Father has been down there for 3 days now. He is talking about the awakening and the keepers. Mother tried to take the lock to the entrance, but Father stopped her. He is wearing the dark cloth now, one of the two he found in the deep chamber. November 9th. The sounds started after midnight. A dragging sound. I went down the shaft. I saw the crypts. I saw Mother. She was wrapped in the second shroud. I couldn't get close. Father was muttering about the central crypt. He said it holds the source. November 10th. I waited until Father was distracted. He was trying to force the central crypt lid. I knew the diagrams. The central one has a secondary lock, hidden beneath the carving. I took the key from the niche. I locked the crypt and sealed the entrance with the stones. I must find someone who understands this history. Not the sheriff. Not the doctor. They won't believe me. William hadn't just run, he had performed a calculated act of self-preservation and protection, utilizing his intimate knowledge of the crypt's unique engineering. He hadn't just stolen the key, he had relocked the central crypt, sealing in whatever source Silas had been raving about. Elias looked at the empty room, his anxiety spiking. William was not a simple missing person. He was a resourceful boy with a terrifying secret, actively avoiding official help because he feared they wouldn't believe the full, gruesome truth. He was carrying a key that, according to his own notes, was designed to keep something in, not merely to lock a door. As the first weak light of dawn began to touch the hilltops, Elias felt a terrible weight settle upon him. They were searching for the boy in the wrong places. William wasn't hiding from the police. He was hiding the key from his father, and the secret from the world. Elias looked at the intricate diagram in William's journal, then at the ornate key in his hand. The central crypt was not just a tomb, it was a vault. And the history of the Moss family was not one of simple farming, but of being the custodians of a terrible burden. The boy's flight now makes horrific sense. But where would a frightened, knowledgeable child go to find someone who would believe the unbelievable truth about a strange, ancient Ozark crypt? Elias knew the official search for William would be fruitless without a change in perspective. He couldn't risk revealing the full, deeply unsettling nature of William's journal, the talk of keepers, lineage, and a source, to the sheriff just yet. It would be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized boy, which would lose them precious time. He needed to find someone who dealt in the strange, forgotten histories of the Ozarks, someone who could lend a rational context to the ancient crypt and its unique geometry. Elias remembered a man, Professor Alastair Finch, an eccentric but brilliant historian and folklorist at the State University, who spent his summers deep in the hills documenting local legends and unique structures. Finch was notorious for his belief that many Ozark myths were rooted in forgotten pre-colonial settlements and geological anomalies. Elias had met him once during a previous search operation. Leaving the sheriff to manage the widening search perimeter and the transportation of Silas and Mary's body, Elias took the journal and the key and made the grueling 2-day journey to the university town. Professor Finch, a man with a wild shock of white hair and an intense, perpetually curious gaze, was initially skeptical. A crypt, Captain? In the pit? That's mining lore, not history. The pit is a collapse feature, an old sinkhole. But when Elias laid out William's detailed map and Silas's raving journal entries, Finch's professional skepticism fractured. When he saw the key, however, he became instantly, intensely focused. Finch picked up the ornate key, turning it over and over, his fingers tracing the triangular bow. Captain Vance, this is extraordinary. I've only ever seen diagrams of this kind of mechanism. This is not 19th century ironwork. The composition, the patina, it could be centuries old. It utilizes a 3-point rotary motion, almost unheard of in this region. Elias then showed Finch the diagrams in William's journal, the meticulously drawn sketch of the crypt's floor and the central sarcophagus. The central crypt, William called it the Vault of the Source, Elias explained. Finch looked at the diagram of the crypt floor and the intersecting lines. He then pulled out a large rolled-up parchment, faded and brittle. It was a 17th century French survey map of the vast Louisiana territory. Finch pointed to a faint, handwritten note scrawled near the area corresponding to the Ozarks. The French noted several anomalies in their early geological surveys. They weren't just charting rivers, they were looking for mineral wealth. They documented strange, localized seismic disturbances that didn't fit with known fault lines. One entry here refers to a place they called Le Silence Profond, the deep silence. The deep silence, Elias repeated, recalling Silas's journal entry. The pit is not a pit. It is a lid. It covers the ancient silence. Finch tapped the map near Le Silence Profond. The notes suggest a massive localized subterranean void, an engineered space used for repository. But the strange part, Captain, is the accompanying local folklore I documented years ago. Stories from the earliest Ozark settlers spoke of a group, a small colony, that arrived before the French. They were not miners or traders. They were referred to in hushed whispers as the Binders. Their purpose, according to the legend, was to seal away a geological threat, not a demonic force, but a genuine subterranean danger they believed they had accidentally unleashed through mining. Finch paused, his expression growing serious. They weren't fighting a ghost, Captain. They were fighting physics. They believed they had disturbed the natural equilibrium of a deep, unique mineral deposit, one that they feared could affect the minds of those exposed to it for too long. They engineered a mechanism to keep it contained. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The metallic odor. The madness. Silas wrote that the family's duty was the care of the deep sleep and the silence. Precisely, Finch confirmed. The Moss family lineage likely descends from the Binders, the self-appointed custodians of this underground mechanism. Their purpose wasn't to live on the land, but to guard the lid. The pieces began to fit with a horrifying, rational precision. Silas's psychosis wasn't a sudden, unprovoked illness. It was a catastrophic failure of a generations-long psychological vigil brought on by his descent and prolonged exposure to whatever lay deep within the crypt. He had become convinced the source was waking, and he needed to open the central vault to complete his duty, or perhaps to destroy it. William understood the danger, Elias realized looking at the boy's journal. He wasn't running from an axe murderer. He was running from a geological nightmare that his father had succumbed to, and he used his inherited knowledge to lock it down. "So the key isn't for opening a coffin," Finch stated, carefully examining the drawing of the central crypt's locking mechanism. "It's for engaging the binding mechanism, an ancient safety device meant to ensure the silence holds." "Then William didn't take the key to run away," Elias muttered, standing up. "He took it because he needs to find a way to permanently seal the mechanism, the only way to break his family's terrible cycle." "If he is anything like his ancestors, Captain," Finch said grimly, "he won't trust the authorities. He'll be seeking out a secluded, highly specialized environment, a place that deals in deep geology, chemistry, and specialized sealing methods." Elias knew exactly where that place was, the State Geological Survey office in the capital, 2 days' travel away. It was the only regional center with the resources and the deep rock specialists William would need. "He's heading for the capital, Professor. He thinks the key is a weapon of sealing, but we need to know what happens if that central crypt is opened." Finch's face was grave. He pointed to the sketch in William's journal, specifically a series of smaller drawings near the central vault. "William drew this, a schematic of the central crypt's interior. It suggests the vault doesn't hold a body. It holds a pressurized internal vessel. If the key is used to unseal it, Captain Vance, it won't just release a smell. It will release a large volume of whatever source the binders were trying to contain. A concentrated, highly toxic mineral vapor, possibly hallucinogenic and deeply damaging to the human psyche." The terror of the Ozark pit was no ghost story. It was an engineered catastrophe, and a desperate boy was carrying the key to a potential disaster. Armed with the horrifying yet scientifically grounded truth from Professor Finch, Elias's mission shifted from rescue and investigation to a race against a potentially unseen geological catastrophe. He immediately wired Sheriff Crowley, omitting the most unbelievable details, but urging him to use all resources to find William's trail leading toward the capital. The journey was a blur of trains, horse-drawn stages, and ceaseless anxiety. Elias reread William's journal countless times, trying to place himself in the mind of the boy. William was intelligent, terrified, and focused on a single goal: stopping the family cycle by ensuring the source remained contained. Elias arrived in the bustling, smog-choked capital city 2 days later, a stark contrast to the clean air of the Ozark Hills. The city felt dense, hurried, and indifferent to the ancient terror he carried with him. He went immediately to the State Geological Survey office. The office was a chaotic hub of maps, rock samples, and the constant clatter of telegraphs. He found the chief geologist, Dr. Eleanor Vining, a formidable woman known for her keen analytical mind and disdain for bureaucracy. "Captain Vance, I received the sheriff's wire," Dr. Vining said, her tone brisk. "A missing boy with an antique key. We deal with rock samples, not lost children." Elias pulled out the key and William's diagram of the central crypt and the pressurized vessel. He laid out the context with cold, factual precision. The ancient crypt, the strange, highly localized metallic odor, the psychosis of Silas Moss, the family's binding history, and the fear of a toxic, concentrated vapor. Dr. Vining, a woman who had seen every geological oddity the state could offer, paused, her gaze fixed on the diagram of the key's interaction with the inner vessel. "The triangular lock mechanism and the pressurized vessel indicated here," she murmured, tapping the page. "It speaks of a remarkable understanding of subterranean stability and vapor containment. This isn't primitive engineering, Captain. It's sophisticated. If a highly volatile, concentrated vapor were released in a confined, deep Earth space like that, the psychological and physical effects could be devastating." Elias pointed to the sketch of the central sarcophagus. "William believed this vessel holds the source, a mineral deposit that drives people mad if they're exposed for too long." Dr. Vining frowned. In this region, the most common localized mineral with known neurotoxic properties is a concentrated compound of arsenic and sulfur, often found in conjunction with ancient pockets of natural gas. If concentrated and aerosolized, the symptoms match your description of Silas Moss's psychosis: extreme paranoia, delirium, and involuntary violence, often culminating in an obsessive focus. The rational explanation was almost more terrifying than any supernatural explanation. Silas wasn't cursed. He was poisoned. If the boy knows this, he won't be looking for a policeman, Elias insisted. He'll be looking for a specialist. He needs to know how to neutralize or permanently seal the contents of that vessel. Where would a knowledgeable boy with a key to a potential arsenic vapor bomb go in this office? Dr. Vining stepped back, considering the layout of her facility. He'd need access to the most specialized equipment for deep earth analysis and containment. That's the subterranean stabilization lab. It's restricted access, Captain. But... She paused, her eyes widening slightly. We've been doing experimental work with high-density, rapidly setting polymer seals for old mining shafts. It would be the only effective permanent way to neutralize the threat. Elias felt a surge of hope and immediate dread. Has anyone unauthorized been near that lab in the last few days? A boy, fitting his description, perhaps 15, quiet, carrying a small satchel. Dr. Vining consulted her logbook. We had an incident report yesterday. A delivery boy, ostensibly delivering papers to the archives, but he was seen near the ventilation shafts leading to the stabilization lab. He was chased off by security, but not apprehended. The description matches the boy in the sheriff's wire. William had made it to the capital. He hadn't asked for help. He had infiltrated the only facility capable of solving his problem. And he knew exactly where to go. Elias now understood William's ultimate plan. The key was meant to engage the binding mechanism, not destroy it. If the key was the only way to interact with the pressurized vessel, William would need to get inside the subterranean stabilization lab, acquire the high-density polymer, and use the key to inject the polymer directly into the vessel, sealing the source forever. We have to get to that lab now, Doctor, Elias urged. If he's accessing the equipment, he's planning on returning to the pit immediately. He needs to use the key in situ. The lab is massive, Captain, and the nearest train out of the city that connects to the Ozarks leaves in less than 2 hours. We need to find him and stop him from undertaking this suicidal mission. As they hurried toward the back wing of the building, a young, nervous intern stopped them. Dr. Vining, there was a break-in reported in the materials storage room this morning. Specifically, the high-density polymer compound used for the shaft sealing experiment. About 50 pounds of it. And one of the office's large, specially designed geological hauling packs is also missing. William wasn't just planning to go back. He had already secured the required sealing material. He was fully prepared. Elias looked at the clock. Less than 2 hours until the last outbound train. He's heading for the station, Doctor. If he makes that train, we lose him to the wilderness. He'll be back in the pit, alone, attempting to neutralize a toxic bomb. We need to find him before he boards. The final, desperate race to save William Moss and contain a geological horror was about to begin. The Grand Central Station was a chaotic, cavernous monument to the industrial age, filled with the roar of steam, the clang of iron, and the ceaseless press of humanity. It was the perfect place for a determined boy carrying a geological hauling pack full of polymer and a dangerous antique key to disappear. Elias and Dr. Vining arrived with minutes to spare before the last westbound train to the Ozarks departed. They split up, weaving through the thick crowds of travelers, laborers, and vendors. Elias's eyes scanned the platform, looking for a boy who looked too focused, too burdened, and too out of place. He moved with a practiced speed, his search and rescue training focusing his senses on the anomalies in the environment. Finally, near the boarding gate for the Ozark line, he saw him, William Moss, The boy was sitting hunched on a wooden bench, his face smeared with dirt, his young shoulders weighed down by a massive canvas and leather geological hauling pack. He was gripping the antique key so tightly that his knuckles were white. He wasn't hiding, he was simply waiting, the picture of exhausted, single-minded resolve. Elias approached slowly, carefully, keeping his hands visible. He knew one wrong move could send William into a terrified flight, or worse, a desperate, irrational confrontation. "William, it's Captain Vance, search and rescue." William flinched violently, his head snapping up. His eyes, the same intense, deep-set eyes as his father's, were filled with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. He didn't run. He just gripped the key harder. "How did you find me?" William's voice was hoarse, strained. "Your journals, William. They told me everything. Your knowledge, your strength, your plan. You're trying to use the polymer to seal the source, aren't you?" William nodded slowly, tears welling up but not falling. "I have to. Father." He wasn't father anymore. He was talking about the binding and the ancestors. He killed Mother. He didn't want the silence to hold. He wanted it to be broken. "I know, William. And Dr. Vining and I believe you. We understand that this isn't magic or ghosts. It's a poison, a toxic mineral vapor that breaks the mind. Your ancestors, the binders, weren't guarding a curse. They were guarding an environmental hazard." Elias knelt down, meeting the boy's level gaze. "But you can't go back there alone, William. The exposure, the risk of a misstep. You're talking about handling a highly pressurized toxic material. It's too dangerous. You've done the hardest part. You secured the sealant, and you prevented your father from unlocking the final mechanism." William shook his head, a gesture of profound, adult-like despair. "You don't understand, Captain. I didn't just lock it. I looked at the diagram of the key's action. That key, Captain, is not just a lock. It's a timer. When you turn it to the locked position, it engages a slow-acting pressure-release valve. It's a fail-safe. A slow leak to keep the pressure from building up and causing an explosion." Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a slow-acting pressure release. "But your father tried to use it to open the central crypt." "He was insane!" William burst out. "He was trying to force the lid, but the lock, the actual final mechanism, is only activated by the key. I turned it to the lock position, Captain, to keep him from opening the vessel. But it's designed by my ancestors to only hold for a limited time before it needs to be maintained. I saw the stress fracture points on the diagram. If I don't use this polymer to seal the vessel soon, the pressure will build up, the mechanism will fail, and it will release the source into the pit all at once. I bought us time, but I didn't solve it. I set a clock." The full horror of the situation crashed down on Elias. William hadn't just run away. He had intelligently, resourcefully, and with immense personal courage, set an urgent deadline for a disaster. He was the only one who understood the key's true function. The train whistle blew a final, deafening blast. The conductor yelled, "All aboard! I have to go now, Captain. I have the polymer. I know the exact injection point. If I miss this train, the pit will be poisoned." William struggled to lift the massive pack. Elias placed a firm, steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "No, William. You don't go alone. You ride that train, and I ride with you. We need to alert the geological survey team, and we need to move quickly. Dr. Vining will have a team ready to follow on the next express, but we are the advance party. You are my guide. You are the expert. You are the only one who knows the mechanism. We will solve this together." William looked into Elias's eyes, seeing not a dismissive official, but a man who finally believed the full, terrifying, rational truth. He nodded, his resolve bolstered by the partnership. They boarded the train as the doors slammed shut, pulling away from the station and heading back into the deepening shadow of the Ozark Mountains. Elias found a seat, placing William next to the window. Tell me everything about the binders, William. Every detail your father ever told you. Every part of the crypt's engineering. We need to anticipate every obstacle. The desperate journey back to the pit was a race against a poison, a pressure valve, and a ticking clock. The true nature of the Moss family tomb has been revealed. It's not a crypt, but a pressurized vault set to fail. William and Captain Vance are racing against a catastrophic deadline. If you want to see how this incredible, high-stakes story of psychological horror and realism resolves, please subscribe now and ensure you don't miss the final chapters. The return journey was agonizingly slow, a constant reminder of the deadline William had inadvertently set. William, relieved to finally share his burden, recounted the details of his family's history with a chilling clarity. The binders weren't just the Moss family, William explained, drawing diagrams on a scrap of paper. There were 4 founding families, Captain. Our purpose was to manage the cycle. Every generation, one family had to descend and reset the pressure valve. It was a secret, an oath of silence. But the original binders knew the vapor was affecting them. The family that stayed too long became the Keeper. They would inevitably descend into madness, murder their spouse to break their link to the living, and seal themselves into the crypt to become part of the deep sleep, the physical seal of the tombs. And the 4 crypts? Elias asked, his voice low. They're not all full. They are the resting places of the Keepers, the ancestors who became too exposed, who went mad, and were sealed in by the next family in the cycle. The tombs themselves are a macabre part of the system. And your father? It was his time. He'd been spending more and more time in the homestead's cellar, which is built right over a natural fissure connected to the pit's deeper air pockets. The vapor concentration was too high. He became the Keeper. He was trying to open the central vault because he believed the only way to fulfill his duty was to release the source and complete the family's sacrifice. A final, catastrophic binding. Elias realized the full, dark genius of the binders. Their system was self-maintaining. The gradual madness of the Keeper was a horrifying biological trigger for the next generation to intervene and reset the cycle, ensuring the key and the knowledge remained within the lineage. The price for containment was the periodic sacrifice of a mind. They arrived back at the edge of the Ozark Hills at midnight. The surrounding woods were intensely dark and quiet. Sheriff Crowley met them, his expression grim. Captain, the atmosphere around the pit has changed. My men say the silence is gone. It's humming. A low, constant electrical sound. We pulled all the search parties back. It's unnerving. Elias knew. The humming was the sound of the pressurized vessel reaching a critical point, the slow-release valve William had engaged now struggling to cope. Sheriff, listen carefully. The pit is a pressure cooker. We need to get William and the polymer to the central crypt, or that area is going to be flooded with a highly toxic vapor. Elias quickly organized the final, desperate team. Himself, William, and 2 of the sheriff's most reliable, non-superstitious deputies. Their objective was simple: reach the crypt, and under William's direct instruction, use the key to inject the polymer. The descent into the pit this time was terrifyingly different. The air was noticeably warmer, stagnant, and heavily laced with the metallic sulfuric smell. The humming sound the sheriff reported was now a distinct, deep vibration resonating up through the earth, felt more than heard. It was the sound of immense pressure. When they reached the hidden entrance, Elias sent the deputies back 20 yards to secure the area and to wait. He couldn't risk more minds being poisoned. "It's just us, William," Elias said, adjusting his lantern. William, though pale, was resolute. He hoisted the heavy hauling pack onto his back. "The key must be turned counterclockwise for the injection sequence, Captain. Not clockwise, or it will fully release the vessel. I have to turn the key and inject the polymer instantly. It has a short setting time." Elias went first, then helped William guide the bulky pack down the narrow shaft. The air in the tunnel was stifling. When they finally entered the crypt chamber, the humming was a deafening, vibrating roar. The lantern light danced across the ancient symbols on the walls, now seeming to pulse with the rhythmic vibration. The central sarcophagus, the vault of the source, was the epicenter of the noise. Fine dust was being ejected from the tiny seam where the lid met the body of the crypt, evidence of the intense internal pressure. "We have to be fast, William," Elias yelled over the roar. They set the polymer pack down. It was a specially designed dispenser unit. William quickly fixed the narrow injection nozzle, which had been modified with a specialized valve, to the corresponding tube on the pack. William then advanced to the crypt, his body vibrating with the stone. He placed his hand on the keyhole, which was subtly marked with the same triangle symbol as the key. "If I turn it the wrong way, Captain, the lock disengages and the vessel's pressure seal fails instantly. I can't look away from the key." Elias stood ready with his revolver, prepared for any sudden shift, any instability in the stone, or any psychological break in the boy. "Do it, William. Trust your knowledge." With a trembling but steady hand, William inserted the key. The metal ground against the ancient mechanism with a sickening shriek that momentarily pierced the humming. He took a deep breath, and with a grunt of effort began to turn the key, not clockwise, but counterclockwise. As the key rotated a quarter turn, a new sound began, a sharp hiss, like a tire going flat, instantly overcome by the metallic sweet vapor that blasted out of the small keyhole, momentarily extinguishing the lantern flame. The vapor hit them instantly. Elias felt a sudden, sharp, intense delirium, a flood of images and paranoia washing over his mind. He saw the symbols on the wall twisting, becoming monstrous faces. He fought it, focusing on the cold steel of his gun. William, exposed to the same vapor, stumbled back, gagging, his eyes rolling. "William, now! The polymer!" Elias roared, grabbing the boy's shoulder, fighting the rising panic that screamed at him to run. The boy fought the psychological onslaught. He lunged forward, slammed the nozzle into the keyhole, and pulled the large activation handle on the side of the pack. With a sound like heavy, wet mud being forced through a pipe, the high-density polymer began to be pumped under immense pressure directly into the pressurized vessel. The humming instantly changed. It became muffled, choked, and slowly, blessedly, began to die down. William slumped against the crypt, gasping, but the job was done. The geological weapon was sealed. The binding was broken, and the cycle of madness was finally ended. But the mystery of the binders was not yet resolved. The injection was successful. Within minutes, the intense humming and vibration ceased completely. The stifling air began to clear, replaced by the faint, non-toxic smell of the industrial polymer. The silence returned, but this time it felt like a blessed absence, not an oppression. Elias helped the coughing, trembling William back toward the entrance shaft, where the deputies were waiting, their faces pale with relief. Back on the surface, the pre-dawn air was cool and clean. Elias, though still shaken by the momentary burst of vapor, felt the psychological fog lifting. He secured William in the wagon with a guard and walked toward the makeshift command center to debrief the sheriff. Sheriff Crowley was waiting, his hands clasped tightly. "Captain, something happened while you were down there. I had to move Silas Moss." "What? Is he lucid?" "No." He started talking again, but this time it wasn't the insane rambling. It was a confession. "I had one of the deputies, a stenographer, take it all down." The sheriff handed Elias a stack of freshly scribbled notes. Elias read, his mind still reeling from the events in the crypt, but the words were crystal clear. "I had to tell William. It was time for him to understand the burden. But Mary, she didn't know the truth. She thought it was just an old well, an old tradition. When I put on the shroud, the keeper's garment, she knew I was going down. She tried to stop me. She begged me not to touch the key. I had to silence her. I had to ensure the key was safe. The lineage of the keepers must be preserved. I strangled her. I wore the shroud, and I sealed her into the central crypt. I knew the key would be taken. It's what happens every time. The next generation takes the key to save the others. But the shame is not the killing. The shame is the other crypt. The other one. The one I opened before I sealed Mary. The one my own father sealed. The one that was supposed to be empty. It was not empty. My father lied. I had to open it. I had to know. Inside there was an empty shroud, the third one. And under it, not a body, just an old faded leather satchel. Inside the satchel, a small hand-stitched doll like the one I made for William. And a single small journal, written in a script I did not recognize. I read the journal. It was written by the very first keeper, the original binder. He wrote about the vapor, the madness, the solution. He wrote about the lie. The lie is that the key is for containment. The truth is that the key is for transfer. The key and the cycle of madness only exist to ensure that one mind, one member of the family, is driven mad just enough to go down and perform the necessary maintenance. The other families died out. Only the Mosses remain. We were the custodians of the key, but we were also the inevitable self-sacrificing victims. When I read the journal, I saw the truth. The central crypt was meant to be empty. It's a mechanism, not a coffin. It was my father who lied. He didn't want to go mad. He didn't want to be the keeper. He tricked his own brother into going down, into becoming the keeper. And then he sealed him into one of the empty crypts to save himself. I saw my father's journal, right next to the first keeper's. He kept it hidden. His madness was not from the vapor. It was from the guilt. The guilt of the deception. The entire cycle became a lie, a cover-up for an act of pure, calculated self-preservation. The true keeper is the one who accepts the duty, who sacrifices their mind for the silence. I am the true keeper. William must not read my father's lies. I am the true keeper of the shame. Elias looked up from the confession, his hand shaking but not from the cold. The terror of the vapor was now superseded by the chilling, all-too-human betrayal that underpinned the entire system. He's confessing to his father's actions, and the whole lineage is built on a lie, Elias murmured. It's not a cursed lineage. It's a family history of calculated betrayal and self-deception, culminating in this tragedy. The sheriff pointed to the final item listed in Silas's confession. The first keeper's journal and his father's hidden journal. He opened a crypt to find the truth, Captain. That crypt is still open down there. He murdered his wife based on a false premise, a psychotic interpretation of a corrupted family history. Elias stood up. We need to go back down one last time, Sheriff. We need those 2 journals. We need the final piece of the puzzle. They went down, the crypt chamber now cold, quiet and stable. The central vault was sealed with polymer. They moved to the crypt Silas had been trying to open before Mary's body was discovered, the one he mentioned finding the truth in. Elias placed the key from the niche into the ornate, almost invisible lock, and with a heavy turn, the massive stone lid groaned open. Inside, as Silas had confessed, there was no body. Just 2 leather-bound journals, a folded ancient shroud, and a small, crudely carved wooden box. Elias opened the box. It contained a single, small, tarnished metal locket. He picked up the 2 journals. They were written in different hands, documenting the true horror. One, the original architect's plea for containment and silent duty. The other, a son's cold, clinical account of how he deliberately ruined the cycle and sacrificed his own brother to save himself from the madness. The true horror of the pit was not the arsenic vapor, it was the calculated, realistic betrayal hidden in the stone. With the crypt stable, Silas sedated and formally arrested for the murder of his wife, and William placed under the care of Dr. Vining and the sheriff, Elias Vance could finally return to the surface, bringing with him the final evidence, The two original journals. Dr. Vining, after analyzing the first keeper's journal, confirmed the terrifying realism of the entire scenario. The mineral vaporization, the psychological effects, the engineering of the crypt. It was all a brilliant, if dark, solution to a severe environmental threat. The binders were not a cult. They were early environmental engineers who chose self-sacrifice to protect a larger populace from a geological hazard. Elias read the two original journals one last time, synthesizing the final, devastating truth of the Moss family's betrayal. Silas was guilty of murder, but his motive was pure madness, triggered by a centuries-old, corrupt system of fear and self-preservation. The final reckoning came with the disposal of the journals and the key. Elias, the sheriff, and Dr. Vining stood at the rim of the pit under the morning sun. The police photographer had documented the crypt, and the entrance had been permanently sealed with an immense quantity of poured concrete, obliterating the entrance shaft entirely. The binder's cycle was finally broken, not by an act of duty, but by a final modern act of containment. Elias held the two original journals, the first keeper's journal detailing the necessary sacrificial duty, and the grandfather's journal detailing the calculating deception. Professor Finch was right, Elias said, looking at the concrete plug that sealed the entrance. The horror wasn't in the geology, it was in the human heart. Silas's madness was triggered by the vapor, but his final act of murder was fueled by a distorted belief in a corrupted family duty. Sheriff Crowley nodded. "We'll tell the public what they can understand, Captain. A man went mad, killed his wife, and the boy, with his knowledge of the old caves, saved himself and, unknowingly, sealed the entrance. Silas will stand trial for murder, and the pit will become a forgotten sinkhole again." The only remaining mystery was the small metal locket found in the sealed crypt. Elias opened it. Inside, there were two small, faded photographs, one of a young man who looked strikingly like Silas, and one of a woman with kind eyes. An ordinary, tragic locket, a small token of the human loss, buried beneath the geological terror. Elias walked over to William, who was sitting quietly in the wagon, waiting for the journey to the state care facility. "William," Elias said, handing him the locket. "This was sealed in the crypt your father opened. It was sealed with the original shroud. It belongs to the history that is now truly sealed." William took the locket, his gaze steady and clear. "Thank you, Captain. The duty is over. The silence is finally true." Elias knew the boy had witnessed and enacted a trauma that would stay with him forever, but he also recognized the strength, intelligence, and survival instinct that had saved not just himself, but perhaps the minds of countless others who would have been drawn to the pit's secret in the following years. The final chilling truth of the Ozark pit was this: the terror was not in the earth's hidden poisons, but in the depths of human ambition, guilt, and the terrible price of self-preservation. The Moss family tomb was not a tomb of the dead, but a monument to the betrayal that had perpetuated a cycle of madness for generations. Elias watched the sun rise fully over the quiet, sealed-off expanse of the pit. The air was clean, the silence absolute. The horrible story of the search and rescue officer was concluded. The duty of the binders was finally, permanently retired.